The rain fell in heavy sheets across the chrome and steel towers of New Centauri Station, the massive orbital city that served as the diplomatic heart of the Galactic Federation. Through the transparent aluminum windows of the Upper Merchant District, beings from dozens of worlds conducted their business while the storm raged outside in the artificial atmosphere dome. Marcus Chun pressed his face against the cool glass, watching the lightning dance between the station's outer rings. At 17, he was one of only 3 humans aboard the station, brought here as part of an experimental cultural exchange program. The other species tolerated his presence, but barely. To them, humans were newcomers, primitives who had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, while their civilizations span millennia. Still daydreaming, monkey? The harsh, clicking voice belonged to Zektar, a young Vrex whose crystalline exoskeleton gleamed with bioluminescent patterns that indicated his noble birth. Behind him stood his usual group of followers, a Thelian with gas-filled breathing sacs that pulsed with each word, 2 tall Andromedans whose silver skin reflected the corridor lights, and a hulking Grox whose 4 arms gestured dismissively. Marcus turned from the window, his jaw tightening. Just watching the storm, Zektar. Appreciating the engineering marvel that keeps us all breathing in space. The Vrex's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Humans and their simple appreciation for basic technology. My people were building orbital cities when yours were still learning to make fire. And yet here I am, breathing the same air as you, Marcus replied evenly. He had learned not to rise to every provocation. The alien students at the Federation Academy made it clear daily that humans were considered the lowest tier of sapient life. Keening laughter erupted from SYLLA, the Thelian girl whose breathing sacs contracted with mirth. The human thinks it belongs here. How precious. Tell us, monkey, what great contribution has your species made to galactic civilization, besides providing entertainment with your crude attempts at diplomacy? Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but forced himself to remain calm. We're still finding our place. Every species had to start somewhere. Yes, but most species showed promise from the beginning, Zektar said, his compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights like fractured rainbows. The Vrex mastered quantum mechanics before we achieved spaceflight. The Andromedans developed telepathic communication networks spanning star systems. What do humans have? Violence and primitive emotions. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the lower levels. Through the transparent flooring, they could see crowds gathering in the market district below. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass echoed up through the station's ventilation system. "What's happening down there?" asked one of the Andromedans, her melodic voice carrying harmonics that made the air shimmer. Zektar's antennae twitched as he accessed the station's information network through his neural implants. Some vagrant is causing trouble in the market. Station security is handling it. Marcus looked down at the gathering crowd and spotted something that made his stomach clench. A figure in tattered robes was being kicked and beaten by a group of merchant beings while others watched or hurried past. The victim was curled on the ground, trying to protect themselves from the blows. "They're beating someone," Marcus said, moving toward the lift. "We should help." Zektar's laughter was particularly harsh. Of course the human wants to interfere. Violence is always your first instinct. It's not violence to stop violence. Marcus shot back, calling for the lift. "Where are you going?" SYLLA asked, her sacs pulsing faster with what might have been concern or excitement. "To help whoever's getting hurt down there." "Don't be ridiculous," one of the Andromedans said, her silver features shifting to express disdain. "Vagrants and beggars are beneath our notice. They're probably outcast caste, exiled from their homeworlds for genetic defects or criminal behavior. Helping them would only encourage more antisocial behavior." Marcus stepped into the lift as the doors opened. "Where I come from, we help people who need it. Doesn't matter what caste they are." "Primitive thinking," Zektar called out as the doors began to close. "This is why humans will never advance beyond client species status." The lift descended through the station's levels, each one representing different social strata. The upper levels housed diplomats, nobles, and the wealthy merchant class. The middle levels contained the working populations, technicians, clerks, and service workers. The lower levels were where the desperate gathered, those without citizenship or legal status who survived on the margins of galactic society. As Marcus reached the market level, the sounds of conflict grew louder. He pushed through the crowd of onlookers, most of whom were recording the incident on their personal devices rather than intervening. The ethics of non-interference ran deep in galactic civilization. Each being was expected to handle their own problems without assistance from others. At the center of the commotion, Marcus saw the source of the violence. A figure in a hooded robe knelt on the grimy floor, while three merchant beings kicked and struck them with energy prods. The victim's clothes were patched and worn, marking them as one of the station's permanent underclass. "Please," the figure gasped, voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "I only asked for food scraps. I meant no offense." "Filthy beggar," snarled one of the attackers, a beetle-like insectoid whose chitin gleamed with commercial success markings. "You pollute this level with your presence. Stay in the waste reclamation areas where you belong." The other attackers were a mollusk being whose tentacles lashed out with cruel precision, and, surprisingly, another human, a middle-aged man whose Federation merchant uniform marked him as someone who had climbed far above his species' usual station. Disgusting, the human merchant spat, delivering another kick. "You make all humans look bad with your begging. Have some pride." Marcus felt rage build in his chest. Bad enough that aliens looked down on humans, but to see one of his own species participating in this brutality was unbearable. He pushed through the last of the onlookers. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, stepping into the circle. "Leave them alone." The three attackers turned to face him, their expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. The human merchant's face twisted with disgust. "Another bleeding heart," he sneered. "Kid, this doesn't concern you. This beggar is disrupting legitimate business." By asking for scraps, Marcus moved to place himself between the victim and their attackers. "That's not worth beating someone half to death." The insectoid's mandibles clicked with irritation. "Human juvenile, remove yourself. This is a matter of maintaining proper social order." "Social order?" Marcus knelt down and gently helped the hooded figure sit up. Up close, he could see delicate features beneath the grime, and bruising, feminine, though determining exact species was difficult with the hood shadowing her face. What social order allows people to be beaten for being hungry? The natural order, the mollusk being gurgled, its translator rendering the words in a wet, unpleasant tone. Genetic inferiors must know their place. This beggar carries the markers of severe deviation. It should not even be permitted to exist. Marcus felt the figure beside him tremble at those words. He looked down and noticed something that made his breath catch. Despite the dirt and tattered clothing, the beggar's hands were too smooth, too refined for someone who had lived rough for very long. There were faint marks on her wrists that looked like they might have come from expensive jewelry or restraints. "You're not from here," Marcus said quietly, meant only for her ears. She looked up at him with eyes that held depths he wasn't expecting. Even in the dim light of the lower level, he could see intelligence there, and something else, a kind of weary recognition. "Please," she whispered, "just walk away. You don't understand what you're involving yourself in." But Marcus had made his decision. He stood up, facing the three attackers who were growing more agitated by his interference. "I'm taking her with me," he announced. "If you want to continue this, you'll have to go through me." The human merchant laughed harshly. "You? Kid, you're barely out of childhood. What are you going to do against grown beings?" "Whatever I have to," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. The insectoid stepped forward, energy prod crackling with power. Human juvenile shows typical species aggression. Perhaps a lesson in respect is required. The weapon lashed out toward Marcus's chest, but he had been in enough fights on Earth to recognize the telegraphed attack. He grabbed the insectoid's weapon arm and used the being's forward momentum to throw him into the mollusk. sending both creatures crashing into a nearby merchant stall. The human merchant pulled out a neural disruptor, a weapon that could cause excruciating pain without permanent damage. "You stupid kid. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're buying yourself?" Before he could fire, station security finally arrived. A squad of enforcement drones surrounded the area, their sensors scanning for weapons and signs of violence. The crowd began to disperse quickly. Being involved with security was never good for one's social standing. "Weapons detected," announced the lead drone in the flat, emotionless tone of artificial intelligence. "All parties will submit to identification and questioning." The merchant quickly holstered his disruptor, his expression shifting to one of injured innocence. "Officers, I was simply trying to maintain order. This beggar was disturbing customers, and this young human interfered with legitimate security measures." Marcus helped the hooded woman to her feet, noting how she seemed to fade into herself, becoming smaller and less noticeable. It was a skill learned through hard experience. "Is this accurate?" the drone asked Marcus. Its sensors focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. "They were beating an unarmed person who asked for food," Marcus replied. "I couldn't just watch." The insectoid had recovered from his tumble and was brushing debris from his carapace. The human juvenile initiated physical violence. "I demand he be arrested for assault." Sensors indicate human Marcus Chun acted in defense of another being, the drone reported after a moment of analysis. "No illegal action detected. However, all parties are advised that physical altercation in commercial areas is discouraged." The security drones began to move away, their interest in the incident already fading. Station security was primarily concerned with maintaining order and protecting property, not ensuring justice for the dispossessed. As the crowd finished dispersing, the three attackers glared at Marcus with obvious hostility. "This isn't over, boy," the human merchant said quietly. "You've made enemies today that your primitive species can't protect you from." They walked away, the insectoid and mollusk flanking the human in a show of cross-species solidarity against the human boy who had dared to interfere with their fun. Marcus turned to check on the woman he had defended, but found her struggling to stand. Her hood had fallen back during the altercation, revealing features that made him gasp in surprise. She was definitely humanoid, but with subtle differences that marked her as something else entirely. Her skin had a faint luminescent quality, and her hair seemed to shift color in the changing light. Now silver, now deep blue, now something that had no name. Her eyes were large and expressive, holding depths that spoke of age far beyond her apparent youth. But it was the bone structure of her face that truly caught his attention. Despite the bruising and grime, there was something unmistakably regal about her features. This was not someone born to beg in the lower levels of space stations. "You're not human," he said, and immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. She pulled the hood back up, hiding her distinctive features once more. "No, I'm not. And you should forget what you've seen here today." "Why? Who are you?" "Someone who can't afford to be recognized," she replied, her voice carrying accents that suggested education far beyond what any beggar should possess. "And someone who has just put a kind young human in terrible danger by accepting his help." Marcus looked around the now empty market area, noting the scattered debris from the fight and the way several merchant stalls had suddenly closed their security barriers. Word was already spreading about the incident. "I don't care about danger," he said firmly. "You needed help. That's what matters." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to solve some complex puzzle. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? For someone your own species was trying to harm?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Marcus said simply. "Where I come from, you don't leave people to get beaten up if you can help it, even if those people might be dangerous to know." Marcus considered this. Everything about this woman suggested mysteries he couldn't even begin to guess at. Her manner of speaking, her bearing despite the beggar's rags, the way she seemed to expect both recognition and danger, none of it fit with someone who had simply fallen on hard times. But Looking at her now, seeing the pain in her eyes, and the way she favored her left side where the kicks had landed, he found that the mysteries didn't matter. Especially then, he said, people who are dangerous to know usually need friends the most. For the first time since he had met her, the woman smiled. It transformed her face completely, bringing warmth and light that had been hidden beneath the grime and exhaustion. You, she said softly, are either very wise or very foolish. Probably both, Marcus admitted. Come on, let me help you get cleaned up. You're hurt. I can't. If I'm seen with you, it will only bring more trouble. Then we'll make sure you're not seen, Marcus said, his mind already working on the problem. I know places in the station where nobody looks too closely. Maintenance areas, service corridors. We can get you somewhere safe. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face again with those deep, expressive eyes. You really mean it, she said finally. You're willing to help someone you know nothing about, expecting nothing in return. Of course I mean it, even though it might cost you everything you've worked for here, your place in the academy, your future in galactic society. Marcus thought about Zektar and his friends, about the constant humiliations and casual cruelty that marked every day of his life on the station. He thought about the way the other humans avoided him, afraid that associating with someone who stood up to aliens would damage their own carefully cultivated positions. What kind of future would that be, really? He asked. One where I have to pretend not to see suffering because it's inconvenient? The woman was quiet for another long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was very soft. What's your name? Marcus Chun. What's yours? You can call me Lyra, she said, though something in her tone suggested it might not be her real name. And, Marcus Chun, I think you are about to discover that sometimes helping a stranger can change your entire world. She stood up straighter, and, for just a moment, something seemed to shift around her. The air itself seemed to bend slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what she might look like when not hiding behind rags and grime. The impression was gone almost instantly, leaving him wondering if he had imagined it. Lead the way, she said simply. And Marcus? Thank you. It has been a very long time since someone helped me simply because it was right. As they made their way toward the service corridors that would keep them out of sight, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something much larger than a simple act of kindness. The way Lyra moved, the careful way she avoided security sensors, the manner in which she seemed to know exactly which routes would be least monitored, none of it matched with being an ordinary beggar. But as they disappeared into the maze of maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the station, Marcus found that he didn't care about the mysteries. Whatever secrets Lyra carried, whatever dangers might come from helping her, he had made his choice. In a universe that seemed determined to teach humans their place at the bottom of the hierarchy, he had chosen to treat another being with basic decency. He had no idea that this simple choice would ultimately reshape the balance of power across the galaxy, or that the woman he was helping to safety was the single most important person in the known universe. All he knew was that someone had needed help, and he had been there to provide it. Sometimes that's all that matters. As they walked through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing softly in the vast mechanical spaces between levels, neither of them noticed the small observation drone that detached itself from a maintenance cluster and began following at a discreet distance. Deep in the station's computer core, automated systems flagged the unusual behavior patterns and marked both individuals for enhanced monitoring. The game of galactic politics had just gained 2 new players, though only one of them knew they were playing. The maintenance tunnels of New Centauri Station stretched for kilometers through the superstructure, a hidden network that allowed automated systems and service personnel to move without disturbing the main population areas. Marcus led Lyra through passages he had discovered during his months of exploration, places where a lonely human teenager could find solitude away from the constant reminders of his species' lowly status. Here, he said, stopping at an intersection where 4 major conduits met. A small alcove had been carved from the original construction, probably meant for emergency equipment storage, but long since forgotten. Marcus had furnished it with salvaged cushions and a portable light unit, creating a refuge where he could study or simply think in peace. Lyra looked around the small space with genuine appreciation. You've made yourself a sanctuary. Sometimes you need somewhere to go where nobody expects anything from you, Marcus said, activating the light and sealing the access hatch behind them. Medical supplies are in that compartment. I keep them here because the Academy's medical bay asks too many questions when humans show up with injuries. She raised an eyebrow at that. Injuries? Growing up human in a galaxy that doesn't think much of humans means learning to fight, or at least learning to take a beating gracefully. Marcus pulled out a medical scanner and basic first aid supplies. May I? Lyra hesitated, then nodded and began to lower her hood. In the better light of the hideaway, Marcus could see the extent of her injuries. Dark bruises covered her arms and ribs, and there was a cut on her forehead that should be treated before it became infected. But it was her unveiled features that truly struck him. Without the concealing shadows, her alien nature was unmistakable. Her skin held that subtle luminescence he had noticed before, and her eyes were larger than any human's, with pupils that contracted and dilated independently as she examined their surroundings. Her hair seemed to move with a life of its own, shifting through spectrums of color that had no earthly equivalent. You're beautiful, Marcus said without thinking, then immediately felt his face burn with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to what? Pay a compliment. Lyra's laugh was like music, harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions Marcus couldn't perceive. Thank you, Marcus-chun. It has been quite some time since anyone called me beautiful. Lately, the most common descriptions have been vagrant, genetic deviation, and waste of resources. Marcus began running the medical scanner over her injuries, trying to focus on the technical readouts rather than her presence. How long have you been on the station? 6 months, 7 days, 14 hours, she replied with precision that spoke of careful tracking. Long enough to understand how the underclass survives here. Long enough to learn that kindness is a rare commodity in civilized space. 6 months living rough. Marcus frowned at the scanner readings. These injuries are fresh, but you show signs of chronic malnutrition and exhaustion. Haven't you been eating? Eating requires money or charity. I have neither. Lyra winced as he began cleaning the cut on her forehead. Food synthesis machines won't operate without credits, and most organic beings here consider my species unpalatable company. What species are you? Marcus asked, then quickly added, if you don't mind saying. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her strange eyes studying his face intently. Would you believe me if I said I was from a world that most beings think is a myth? After everything I've seen today? Probably. I am ethereal, she said simply, as if the name should mean something. Marcus paused in his medical work. The name was familiar. He had heard it in whispered conversations among the older academy students, always spoken with a mixture of reverence and skepticism. Ethereals are supposed to be extinct, he said carefully. The homeworld was destroyed in some kind of civil war, wasn't it? That was centuries ago. 237 years ago, Lyra confirmed. And, yes, most ethereals died when our world burned. But some escaped. Some survived. Some have been hiding among the other species, pretending to be refugees from the outer rim or genetic variants from established worlds. Marcus resumed his medical work, processing this information. If she was really ethereal, then everything he thought he knew about galactic history might be wrong. Why are you here, though? On the station? If your people are supposed to be gone, why aren't you staying hidden somewhere safe? Lyra's expression darkened. Because nowhere is safe. Not anymore. The same forces that destroyed my homeworld are still active, still hunting survivors. They believe they finished us off centuries ago, but they're starting to suspect otherwise. Who are they? That's a very dangerous question to ask, Marcus-chun. Lyra's voice carried warning. The kind of question that gets people disappeared, even humans with diplomatic immunity. Marcus finished treating her injuries and sat back, studying her carefully. Everything about her story should have sounded like paranoid delusion, but the way she spoke, the authority in her voice despite her beggar's rags, suggested truth. "You're not really a vagrant, are you?" he said. "This whole thing, living on the station's lower levels, the begging, it's an act. A necessary disguise," Lyra admitted. "Though I assure you, the hunger and pain are quite real. Pretending to be desperate is much more convincing when you actually are desperate. But why? What are you really doing here?" Lyra stood up and began pacing the small space, her movements fluid and graceful despite her injuries. "The Galactic Federation is built on a lie. Marcus, the treaty that established it, the constitution that governs it, the very legal framework that holds it together, all of it rests on documents that were forged. That's impossible. The Federation has existed for over 800 years. Every species in known space is a signatory to the original compact. Every surviving species," Lyra corrected. "The compact was originally designed by the Ethereals as a framework for genuine cooperation between worlds. It included protections for developing species, strict limitations on exploitation of primitive worlds, and guaranteed representation for all sapient life forms." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying the real treaty would have protected species like mine? Your people should never have been classified as a client species. Under the true compact, humanity would have been granted full membership status from the moment you achieved faster-than-light travel. Your world would have been protected from exploitation, and your people would have been given seats on the High Council based on population and territorial holdings." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Everything his species had been told about their place in the galaxy, every humiliation and restriction they had endured, had been based on fraudulent documents. "How do you know this?" Lyra stopped pacing and faced him directly. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to resonate in the air itself. "Because I helped write the original compact. Because my people sacrificed everything to create a just framework for galactic civilization. And because I am the last surviving member of the Ethereal High Council." The small maintenance alcove fell into stunned silence. Marcus stared at Lyra, trying to reconcile the bruised beggar he had rescued with the implications of what she had just revealed. "You're saying you're some kind of government official from a dead civilization?" "I am saying that I am the sole legitimate authority for treaty modifications under the original compact. Every law passed by the current Federation, every territorial claim, every trade agreement, every military action, all of it is illegal under the true Galactic Constitution." Marcus's mind reeled. "If that's true, then you're not just important. You're the most dangerous person in the galaxy from the perspective of the current power structure," Lyra finished. "Which is why I've spent the last 2 centuries hiding, learning, and gathering evidence of the Federation's crimes." 2 centuries? Marcus looked at her with new eyes. She appeared young, perhaps 20 in human terms, but if she was truly ethereal. "My people have extended lifespans compared to most species. What you see as youth is actually middle age by our standards." Lyra's expression grew distant. "I was barely an adult when our world died. I watched the orbital bombardment from a refugee ship, saw the surface burn away everything I had ever known." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, meaning it. The loss in her voice was genuine and deep. "The beings who destroyed my world made one critical error," Lyra continued. "They assumed that eliminating the ethereal homeworld would destroy all records of the original compact. But the true documents were stored in multiple locations, including several off-world archives. I have spent 2 centuries gathering those documents, piece by piece. And now I have everything I need to prove the Federation's illegitimacy. Constitutional documents, correspondence between the original framers, even recorded testimony from species leaders who participated in the founding. Evidence that would topple the current government and require a complete restructuring of galactic civilization." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was describing. "That's That would be the biggest political upheaval in recorded history, which is why I've been so careful. The beings who orchestrated the original deception are still in power, still eliminating anyone who threatens their control. They have intelligence networks spanning every major world and enforcement capabilities that dwarf most planetary militaries. But you said they were starting to suspect ethereals had survived. What changed? Lyra's expression grew grim. Someone has been feeding them information about my activities. 3 months ago, they raided a safe house where I had been staying. 2 months ago, they intercepted a data courier carrying copies of some documents. Last month, they nearly captured me on a transport ship. So you came here, to the diplomatic heart of the Federation. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. The station's lower levels are full of displaced persons from dozens of worlds. One more desperate refugee should attract no attention. Lyra's laugh was bitter. Of course, I hadn't counted on being spotted by someone who knew enough to recognize what I was. The people who attacked you today, they knew. The merchant, at least, suspected. His comments about genetic deviation were too specific to be casual bigotry. Someone has been circulating descriptions, warning certain individuals to watch for ethereal characteristics. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. That's why you tried to warn me away. You thought I might be working for them. It seemed likely. A human approaches a suspected ethereal, offers help, gains trust. It's exactly the kind of infiltration tactic they would use. Lyra has studied his face carefully. But your reaction to learning what I am suggests otherwise. Either you are a far better actor than most intelligence operatives, or you are genuinely as naive as you appear. I prefer to think of it as optimistic, Marcus said. And for what it's worth, I believe you. About the treaty, about the conspiracy, about everything. It explains too much about how humans have been treated. Believing and acting on that belief are very different things, Marcus Chun. Why I've told you could get you killed if the wrong people learn you know it. Marcus considered this. Everything about his life had just been recontextualized. His species treatment as clients, the casual dismissal and contempt from other races, the restrictions on human expansion and development, all of it based on forged documents and illegal power structures. What do you need? He asked finally. What? You're here for a reason. You have evidence that could reshape galactic civilization, but you're hiding in maintenance tunnels and begging for scraps. You must need something to complete whatever you're planning. Lyra stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was serious. I need access to the Federation's central archives, she said finally. The original forged documents are stored there, along with records of how the deception was maintained. With direct access, I could download proof of the modifications and compare them to the authentic versions I carry. And then I could present irrefutable evidence to the High Council. Even the current corrupt leadership would have difficulty arguing against their own archived records. Marcus nodded slowly. The archives are in the station's core levels. High security, restricted access, full biometric scanning for everyone who enters. Exactly. Impossible for a dead vagrant to access. But not impossible for a student at the Federation Academy, Marcus said thoughtfully. Academic research privileges include limited access to historical documents, even classified ones. With the right project proposal. Marcus, no. Lyra's voice was sharp with alarm. What you're suggesting is beyond dangerous. These people have eliminated entire species to protect their power. They wouldn't hesitate to kill one human student. They might hesitate if that human student was just conducting routine academic research, Marcus replied. No one pays attention to humans anyway. We're too primitive to be a threat. Except you wouldn't be conducting routine research. You'd be attempting to expose the greatest conspiracy in galactic history. Only if I get caught. Lyra grabbed his shoulders, her grip surprisingly strong. Marcus, listen to me carefully. Why I'm asking you to consider could result in your death, the death of your family on Earth, possibly the bombing of your entire homeworld. These beings do not make distinctions between combatants and civilians. Marcus met her eyes directly. And if I don't help, how many more species will be classified as clients? How many more worlds will be exploited? How many people will die because the galaxy is being run by criminals? That's not your responsibility, isn't it? You said the original compact would have protected developing species. How many civilizations has humanity encountered in our 50 years of space travel? Dozens. Some of them were barely discovering agriculture. Under the current system, what happens to them when the Federation decides their worlds have valuable resources? Lyra's expression grew pained. They become client species if they're fortunate, resource extraction colonies if they're not. Then it is my responsibility, not just as a human, but as someone who knows the truth. Marcus gently removed her hands from his shoulders, but held them in his own. Besides, you said yourself, I'm either very wise or very foolish. Either way, I'm committed to helping you. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would you risk everything for people you've never met, worlds you've never seen? Marcus thought about the question seriously. Because someone once told me that the measure of a person isn't what they do when others are watching, but what they do when they think no one will ever know. Right now, in this tunnel away from everyone and everything, this is who I choose to be. Lyra's eyes filled with something that might have been tears, though they gleamed with the same luminescence as her skin. Your species may be young, Marcus Chun, but you understand honor in ways that beings with millennia of civilization have forgotten. So you let me help? I'll let you try, she said finally. But we do this carefully, methodically, with every precaution possible. And if anything goes wrong, if there's even a hint that you've been compromised, you walk away immediately. Promise me. I promise to be as careful as possible, Marcus said. I can't promise to walk away if people need help. Lyra laughed despite herself. I should have expected that answer. A soft chime sounded from Marcus's personal communicator, indicating the end of the academic day. Soon, the service corridors would be busier as maintenance crews began their evening rounds. We should go, Marcus said. But first, you need better clothes and a place to stay that isn't a waste reclamation area. I can't afford, I can. Marcus began gathering his medical supplies. I've got student housing and a small allowance from the cultural exchange program. It's not much, but it's enough to get you cleaned up and fed properly. Marcus, being seen with me is dangerous for you. Being seen with a vagrant is dangerous. Being seen with someone who looks like a respectable citizen is just social interaction. Marcus grinned. First lesson in human survival tactics. Sometimes the best disguise is looking like you belong. As they prepared to leave the small sanctuary, Lyra caught Marcus's arm one more time. Before we do this, she said quietly, before we commit to a course that may get us both killed, I want you to understand something. The conspiracy I've described, the beings responsible for it, they're not motivated by simple greed or power lust. They believe, genuinely believe, that they are protecting galactic civilization from chaos. That's supposed to make me feel better about them. It's supposed to make you understand how dangerous they are. Criminals can be reasoned with, bribed, or intimidated. True believers will destroy anything they see as a threat to their vision of order. Lyra's voice carried the weight of hard experience. These beings have convinced themselves that a galaxy ruled by deception is better than one that might fragment into war. And what do you think? I think, Lyra said slowly, that a civilization built on lies will eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The only question is whether it will take the rest of the galaxy with it. As they sealed the access hatch behind them and began making their way through the maintenance tunnels toward the upper levels, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line he would never be able to cross back. Everything about his life was about to change, and there was no guarantee he would survive what was coming. But as he looked at Lyra, seeing her begin to move with purpose and hope instead of the defeated shuffle of a beaten beggar, he knew he had made the right choice. Some things were worth risking everything for. The question was whether they would live long enough to see their gamble pay off. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first encountered Lyra in the market district, and the transformation was remarkable. With proper nutrition, medical care, and clothing that didn't mark her as a vagrant, she had emerged from her disguise like a butterfly from its cocoon. Her natural luminescence had returned. Her alien features were striking rather than hidden, and her bearing spoke of the nobility she had always possessed. She now posed as Dr. Lyra Stellaris, a xenobiology researcher from the Outer Rim conducting comparative studies on adaptive evolution. Her falsified credentials, purchased from one of the station's less scrupulous information brokers, were sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection. More importantly, her obvious knowledge of galactic biology made the cover story believable to anyone who spoke with her. Marcus had spent those same 3 weeks carefully building his academic research project. His proposal to study the evolution of interspecies diplomatic language in early Federation documents was exactly the kind of boring historical analysis that would give him access to the central archives without attracting attention. His professors had approved it with the kind of disinterested efficiency reserved for projects they expected to put them to sleep. "Remember," Lyra said as they stood outside the archive entrance, "you're looking for specific document sets. The original Centauri Accords, the Andromeda Integration Treaty, and the Terra Classification Protocols. Those 3 documents should contain the most obvious signs of tampering." Marcus nodded, adjusting his student research badge. "What exactly am I looking for?" "Inconsistencies in language, anachronistic legal concepts, and, most importantly, any reference to emergency provisional classifications in the Terra Protocols. That language was added after the fact to justify downgrading species that should have been granted full membership." The archive entrance was an imposing archway of crystalline material that seemed to bend space around itself. 2 guard stations flanked the entrance, manned by hulking Grok security officers whose forearms were enhanced with military-grade cybernetics. Student researcher Marcus Chun reporting for archive access. Marcus announced, presenting his credentials. One of the guards scanned his badge with a device that projected holographic displays of his identification, academic standing, and approved research parameters. The scan seemed to take forever, but finally, the guard gestured him through. "Research Terminal 7 is assigned to your session. Duration is limited to 4 hours. No recording devices, no data removal without supervisory approval." Marcus walked through the archive entrance, feeling the strange spatial distortion wash over him like walking through thick liquid. The sensation lasted only seconds, but it left him slightly disoriented as he emerged into the vast chamber beyond. The Federation's central archives were a monument to galactic civilization. Crystalline storage matrices stretched from floor to ceiling in towering columns, each one containing the compressed data of entire worlds. Holographic displays showed the swirling patterns of information flow as automated systems managed petabytes of legal documents, historical records, and cultural archives. Research Terminal 7 was located in a relatively isolated section, surrounded by terminals that appeared to be unoccupied. Marcus settled into the interface chair and activated the system, watching as his approved research parameters loaded into the display. "Beginning search for historical diplomatic documents," he said aloud, knowing that all sessions were monitored. "Focus on early Federation treaty language and its evolution." The search results populated quickly. Hundreds of documents appeared in chronological order, from the earliest interspecies contacts to the complex multi-party agreements that govern modern galactic civilization. Marcus began with the most innocuous materials, establishing a pattern of legitimate research before moving toward the sensitive documents. 2 hours into his session, he finally accessed the Centauri Accords, the foundational treaty that had established the Federation itself. According to the official history, it had been negotiated between 12 species over a period of several years, creating the framework for peaceful cooperation and mutual development. But as Marcus read through the document, he began to notice exactly the kind of inconsistencies Lyra had warned him about. Legal concepts that shouldn't have existed when the treaty was supposedly written. references to species that hadn't achieved spaceflight until decades later. Most tellingly, entire sections written in a standardized legal language that hadn't been developed until the Federation was already established. He moved on to the Andromeda Integration Treaty, supposedly negotiated when that galaxy's major powers joined the Federation. Again, the same problems: anachronistic language, impossible timelines, and legal concepts that belong to a much later period. But it was the Terra classification protocols that provided the smoking gun Lyra had been seeking. The document that had classified humanity as a client species was clearly a patchwork of different texts. The sections dealing with primitive species development were written in archaic legal language that matched the style of legitimate early Federation documents. But the critical section that established the criteria for client status was written in completely different terminology. More damning still, the metadata showed that the client status sections had been added to the document decades after it was supposedly ratified. The timestamp signatures were hidden in the file structure, but they were there for anyone who knew how to look. Marcus carefully documented the inconsistencies, using the archive's annotation system to highlight the problematic sections. His research was building a clear pattern. The modern Federation was built on systematically forged historical documents. "Student Shun," a voice said behind him. "How is your research progressing?" Marcus turned to find a tall Andromedan woman approaching his terminal. Her silver features bore the markings of high bureaucratic rank, and her presence in the archives suggested authority far above his academic level. "Very well, thank you," Marcus replied carefully. The evolution of diplomatic language is quite fascinating when you can trace it through the original documents. "Indeed, I am Administrator Zelia from the Cultural Heritage Division. We monitor all research involving foundational documents to ensure academic accuracy." She gestured at his displays. "May I review your findings?" Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but tried to maintain an expression of academic enthusiasm. "Of course. I'm finding some interesting patterns in how legal terminology evolved over the early centuries." Administrator Zelia leaned over his terminal, her large eyes scanning the documents he had highlighted. For several long moments, she studied his annotations in complete silence. "These highlighted sections," she said finally, "what specifically drew your attention to them?" "Language anachronisms, mostly. Legal concepts appearing in documents before they were supposedly developed. It's probably just copying errors from later transcription, but it makes for interesting study of how historical accuracy can be compromised over time." The administrator straightened, her expression unreadable. "Student Shun, I wonder if you might be available for a consultation with our Historical Accuracy Review Board? Your observations could be valuable for ensuring the integrity of our archived materials." Every instinct Marcus had developed during his time on the station screamed danger. Being invited to consult with review boards was not something that happened to student researchers, especially human ones. "I would be honored," he said, trying to project naive enthusiasm. "When would be convenient?" "Immediately, if possible. We have a conference room just adjacent to the archives where we could discuss your findings in detail." Marcus felt trapped. Refusing the invitation would be suspicious, but accepting it might be walking into an interrogation or worse. He made a split-second decision based on what he hoped was sound tactical thinking. "Could we schedule it for tomorrow instead? I'm still collecting data, and I'd like to present complete findings rather than partial observations." Administrator Zelia studied his face carefully. "Of course, thoroughness is always appreciated. Shall we say tomorrow at midday?" "Perfect," Marcus agreed, beginning to save his work and shut down his terminal. "I should finish up for today anyway." For hours passes quickly when the material is this engaging. He gathered his notes, keeping his movements casual and academic while his mind raced through escape plans. The administrator remained at his shoulder as he completed his shutdown procedures, her presence making it clear that he was being carefully observed. "Until tomorrow, then," she said as he prepared to leave. "Looking forward to it," Marcus replied, hoping his smile looked genuine. As he walked toward the archive exit, Marcus fought the urge to look back. He could feel the administrator's eyes following him, and he suspected that his terminal was being examined the moment he stepped away from it. The exit procedure seemed to take longer than before, with security conducting more thorough scans than his entrance had required. But eventually he was through the crystalline archway and back into the station's main corridors, where he forced himself to walk at a casual academic pace rather than the dead run his instincts demanded. He made his way through the residential levels to the modest quarters he had been sharing with Lyra, taking a circuitous route that allowed him to check for surveillance. By the time he reached his door, he was reasonably certain he hadn't been followed, but his confidence was shaken. "Lyra," he called as he entered the apartment. "We need to talk." She emerged from the small kitchen area, took one look at his face, and immediately activated a small device that filled the room with white noise designed to defeat listening devices. "What happened?" she asked tersely. Marcus quickly outlined his session in the archives, the evidence he had found, and his encounter with Administrator Zelia. As he spoke, Lyra's expression grew increasingly grim. "They know," she said when he finished. "The invitation to consult with a review board is how they extract people who get too close to sensitive information." "What do you mean extract?" "I mean they bring you in for questioning, determine how much you know, and who you've told, and then you disappear, usually listed as a tragic accident or sudden departure from the station." Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "So what do we do?" "I'm supposed to meet with them tomorrow." "You're not meeting with anyone tomorrow. We're leaving the station tonight." "But the evidence is meaningless if we're dead." Lyra began moving around the apartment, gathering essential items with practiced efficiency. "Besides, what you found was just confirmation of what we already knew. The real evidence is what I've been carrying for 2 centuries. Then, why do we need the archive access?" "Because we needed official Federation documentation to prove the forgeries. Your research provides independent verification that their own records don't match their claimed history." Lyra paused in her packing. "It's enough, Marcus. Combined with the original documents I possess, we can make our case to the High Council, assuming we can get to them. That's where having an appointment helps." Lyra's smile was grim. "I've been monitoring council schedules for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Tomorrow, the full council meets in emergency session to address some crisis in the Outer Rim. Every member will be present." Marcus stared at her. "You're planning to just walk into a High Council meeting and announce that their entire government is illegitimate?" "More or less, yes. That's insane. It's the only chance we're likely to get. Once Administrator Zelia realizes you've fled the station, they'll know their security is compromised. They'll start implementing damage control protocols, possibly including eliminating other potential witnesses." Lyra's expression was deadly serious. "Marcus, what you stumbled into today was bigger than we realized. If they have a cultural heritage division specifically monitoring research into foundational documents, they've been managing this cover-up for centuries. How do we even get into a High Council session?" "With these." Lyra produced a set of credentials that made Marcus's eyes widen. They identified her as Ambassador Lyra Stellaris, with full diplomatic immunity and council access privileges. "I've been preparing for this moment for decades. The identity, the credentials, the research to back up my claims, all of it leading to tomorrow. And if it doesn't work, if they refuse to listen or just have us arrested, then we make sure the truth gets out anyway." Lyra handed him a small data crystal. "This contains copies of everything. The original treaty documents, the evidence you gathered today, recordings of conversations with beings who remember the true founding of the Federation. If something happens to us, I've arranged for this information to be transmitted to resistance groups on 50 different worlds." Marcus took the crystal, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. "Resistance groups? Did you think we were the only ones who suspected the truth? There are beings throughout the galaxy who have noticed the inconsistencies, the suppressed histories, the convenient disappearances of inconvenient voices. Most of them lack the evidence to act, but they're organized and they're waiting. For what? For someone to ring the bell, Lyra said simply. Someone to step forward with proof that can't be ignored or dismissed. Marcus looked around the small apartment that had been his home for the past 3 weeks. Despite the constant undercurrent of danger, they had been some of the best weeks of his life. Working with Lyra, feeling like he was part of something important, treating her as an equal rather than a superior being, it had given him a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. "What happens to Earth if we do this?" he asked. "To my people, under the true compact, humanity would be granted full Federation membership immediately. Your world would be protected, your people would have genuine representation, and your species would be free to develop according to your own values rather than Federation oversight. And if we fail, then your people will remain clients forever, slowly being absorbed into Federation culture until nothing distinctly human survives." Lyra's voice was gentle but firm. "Marcus, what we're doing tomorrow isn't just about justice for past wrongs. It's about the future of every developing species in the galaxy." Marcus nodded slowly. When she put it that way, there really wasn't a choice at all. "So we do this tomorrow. Walk into the High Council chambers and turn galactic civilization upside down." "We do this tomorrow," Lyra agreed. "And Marcus? Whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. For 2 centuries, I've been driven by duty and revenge. But watching you help a stranger simply because it was right reminded me what I was really fighting for, which is the possibility that beings of different species can treat each other with dignity and respect, that the galaxy might someday live up to the ideals we embedded in the original compact." Lyra's smile was radiant. "You gave me hope again, Marcus-chun. Whatever tomorrow brings, that was worth more than I can express." As they finished their preparations for departure, Marcus realized that Lyra was right. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Either they would succeed in exposing the greatest conspiracy in galactic history, or they would die in the attempt. But as he looked at the data crystal in his hand, knowing it contained information that could reshape the galaxy, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The human who had been dismissed as primitive, who had been mocked for helping a beggar, was about to help topple an empire built on lies. And for the first time since arriving at New Centauri Station, Marcus Chun felt genuinely proud to be human. The next morning would bring either liberation or destruction. But tonight, sitting in a small apartment with the most important person in the galaxy, planning to attempt the impossible for the sake of species they would never meet, Marcus had never felt more alive. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what happened when you underestimated the power of simple human decency. Tomorrow, they would discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is someone willing to help a stranger because it's the right thing to do. Tomorrow, everything would change.